Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. Hello, welcome. Welcome to this week's masterclass. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we start, let me just say a quick reminder that we're having these sessions once every 2 weeks on Wednesdays, usually at 5 p.m. UK time. So feel free to join us anytime you want. And make sure you follow us on our social media, since we share all of our upcoming events there. Today, our guest is Miroslav. He's an LSDM alumnus from our Masters in Design program. Miroslav is a CX designer, and for today's session, we'll be discussing the topic Decode the Context, Unveiling the Typography's Impact on Brand Perception. At the end, we'll open the session for a quick Q&A, so if you want, you can write your questions in the chat during the presentation, and then at the end, we'll read them. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Miroslav, for accepting our invitation and being here with us today.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Decode the Context Masterclass. I want to thank London School of Design and Marketing for facilitating this, as well as your fellow colleagues and students for taking the time to attend. I also see some familiar names in the chat, which does not make this presentation any easier for me, but welcome. So today, as Shania mentioned, we will explore typographic impact on the brand perception. We will see the typographic connection between the form and the personality in the context of corporate logotypes. So let's dive into it. We do create a lot of text. And to find out exactly how much text I generate, a tracker was installed on my laptop. And tracking, as you can see on the screen, has started on the 4th of April last year. And you can see that during those 17 approximately months of using this laptop, I have created and made more than 2 million keystrokes. Now, by approximation, Director of Research of Google, Peter Nurvik, has determined that the average word length, if in English language, is about 4.7 letters long, meaning that I have, by approximation, typed out 450,000 words during this period. Now, considering that I deal with visual communication primarily in my daily work, this was a very surprising find. We write documents, we write reports, stories, love notes, shopping lists through letters, which then form words, which then form sentences that convey information and meaning. And typography has been hidden in plain sight, as it is not rightfully in the center of attention. It's rather like a medium to carry something. And it is important to look at the single letter, because that sublime form determines how the content is transmitted and perceived. If we look at a typographic structure from a technical standpoint, we notice some kind of anthropological vocabulary being used for some elements. So, for example, as you can see on the screen, a letter can have an arm, it can have a neck, it can have an ear, a leg, a spine, even the shoulder. So not only that we recognize physical attributes in typography, we also assign feelings or some kind of character traits to them. And we started assigning personality traits to typography very early. The Gothic letter, known as black letter, was used in Western Europe somewhere around 12th to 17th century. In some countries like Germany, it was present until early 20th century. And it was characterized by these thick strokes, and it was considered barbaric by Renaissance humanists. For Italians, the letters that you see on the screen were un-Roman, primitive, not just because of their heavy looks, but for political reasons. They were culturally tied to their 6th century aggressors. And for that reason, they had a bad connotation for the Italians. The technological advancement in just the last 40 years provided us with tools that made it so easy and fast to produce new letter forms in digital environment. In 2019, a service called What Font Is cataloged more than 500,000 fonts. Today, that number is at staggering 770,000 fonts, both in commercial and non-commercial space, showing that font availability is greater than ever, and it is continuing to grow. So the question that rose for me was, what is an appropriate typography? I wanted to examine how corporate typography is perceived by people outside of the context of a single brand. So what happened then? I made a selection of 10 famous brand logos from a range of industries. And after I have identified the typography for each, they had been presented in a neutral form. So they were stripped from any brand recognizable visual artifacts like colors, titles, and logo marks. They were then compared against a series of descriptions to see whether the form of this letters matches the industry and the values that these brands wanted to convey. Now, a survey was conducted on a sample of around 60 participants out of 93% work in the creative field, dealing with typography in some way or another. And I was particularly interested in this target group as they often are decision makers when it comes to developing a visual identity. So primarily in development of logo types. In the first stage of this research, each participant was given 10 neutralized logo types and a list of keywords. And on the left side, you can see these keywords. And they did not know which brand they were rating, or if this was any particular brand in question. And you can see, for example, that the typography used for Mercedes-Benz scored low overall and the lowest on keyword automotive, which is very interesting. On the other hand, Netflix had a very good score overall, with appropriateness rating being the highest for the keyword movie. The typography used for WordPress was deemed appropriate for publishing and for the keyword free, but scored poorly for technology and software. The New York Times typography had the best single score as it was deemed very appropriate for news. 63% gave high and very high appropriateness rating. And you can also see that it scored badly for the keyword fast, with 85% of people giving low and very low appropriateness rating for this keyword. And this was the worst single keyword rating result in the survey. Overall, Ford's typography was rated worst on the appropriateness scale for these keywords that you see: adventure, historic, tough, in your face, pride, power, and automotive. Interestingly, Lufthansa's typography was overall rated best on the appropriateness scale for these keywords that you see on your screen. They use Helvetica, which can be characterized as a global and neutral typeface. And I have written more about these two attributes in the report. But this typography is easy to identify with because it is stripped of any visual characteristic that can suggest a strong personality. Rather, its personality is decided by the viewer itself. And work that was developed during this research stage was twofold. I have developed a mock typography for each of these brands that was, it can be described as a caricature. So the purpose of this was to shock the viewer and contrast the keywords. It was supposed to be inappropriate on so many levels. So that was one portion of it. The second portion of it was developing two alternative logo types for each brand. And the goal for these logo types was to represent those keywords in the best possible way. In the second stage of the research, some participants were then asked to choose the most appropriate logo type that would best represent the whole set of keywords. And this was the same set of keywords that was shown in the stage 1. So for each brand, they were presented with 4 choices. One choice was the original typography. Another choice could be a mock version, and 2 alternative options. And then the choices were randomized within each question on the screen. So basically, if you see these, the list of the keywords, the same list of the keywords that they were rating before, now they had to decide which out of these 4 logos fits best the set of keywords that they have been presented with. And now, interestingly enough, both Ford and WordPress scored the lowest, with only 15% of participants choosing current typography as the most appropriate one, meaning that in 6 out of 10 questions, none of 60 participants chose the mock typography as appropriate. 2 participants reported that they were not able to proceed with the questions as they were upset with the presented choices. One of them said that this particular brush script should be outlawed. Now, overall, the study has shown that participants on average deemed alternative typography as more appropriate than the original. So if we are to translate these findings into a new visual identities, we would get completely different brand images. Only Duolingo and Netflix would keep the same typeface as a distinguishing mark for their brand identity. Before I continue, I wanted to ask all of you who are here on the call to answer 2 simple questions. So if you have your phone with you, jump in by scanning the either QR code or going to the website menti.com, and you can use the code in there to join the questionnaire. I'll switch the screens here. So either scan the QR code or go to Mentimeter and enter the code. And I will wait just a couple of more seconds so that we can have more people. And the first question that you can answer is, what brand would you reimagine? So if you had a chance, what logo type would you redesign? Any company, any industry in the world. And you can submit as many answers as you would. Oh, somebody is really brave with an Apple one. Okay, so in the mix are the leading Coca-Cola, McDonald's, WordPress, Toyota. Toyota did a rebrand recently, actually. ZF, Quora, X or Twitter. Yeah, that is very... They are in need of rebrand, I would say, that's for sure. Hulu, and the bravest person definitely in the chat was the one who said Apple. Peugeot, okay. They also recently had a rebrand effort. Pepsi. Renault too. Okay, second question, we'll stop here. Why? So if you voted, then you probably had a pretty good reason to do it. So somebody said that they feel that the particular logo they voted for was outdated. Somebody said that it needs more visibility. Somebody likes the brand. That's a pretty good reason. Futura, I guess that the person voted for the typography that they would choose for the particular brand. I'll wait for a couple of more seconds, and doesn't match the brand. That's an interesting answer. We'll talk more about that. It's old. I would follow up to this reason. Misses the fifth element, which is love. If you understood that reference, you're old enough to have watched the movie The Fifth Element. Old-fashioned. That is interesting. What does make a certain logo old-fashioned? Because it was contemporary at one point of time, right? We'll talk more about this. I will switch back to the presentation. Just give me a second here. There we go. And we are here. For me personally, and as an outcome of the research that I showed to you, WordPress was one of these brands that I really wanted to reimagine. It scored really badly on the typography appropriateness. And this is what, as a consequence of all of those questions that I asked, was how I reimagined it. Another brand that I wanted to reimagine was Dolce & Gabbana. I'm not particularly big on fashion brands, but this was one that I really wanted to redo. So Futura becomes Goldini. Quora was another one because, as somebody has answered, it felt a little bit outdated. And then my personal favorite and the most drastic intervention was on Ford. And this is how I reimagined the Ford Performance division, which is their sports and competitive division. Now, 2 months ago, or 2 years after I turned my findings into new brand images, Ford did actually rebrand their performance division. In June, I think it was June 6th, they displayed a Mustang with a Lee design livery that showcased that what they say is a simplified look that will be soon featured on its all racing vehicles. And the traditional blue oval with Ford Performance in white lettering underneath will now be rebranded simply FP, which is Ford Performance. Listen to this. This is a statement by CEO of Ford. And he said, "We're going to build a global motorsports business off-road and on-road, adding that this design, I quote, is unapologetically American." And he believes that Ford's new direction will help the company sell street cars, race cars, and create a merchandise line that convinces consumers that they're a hip and cool brand. Now, at the time, I was making a conclusion that these findings, and one of the hypotheses that I made was that we're going to see more rebrand efforts from the automotive industry. And what Ford did is not exactly what I had in mind. And although this example that you can see of how rebrand project depends actually on cultural context. So what is simple and cool for the American audience by their standards does not necessarily translate for us in Europe or in another part of the world. And many car manufacturers embraced this electrification of mobility, considering a new wave of consumers that care about environment. Somehow automotive industry needed to merge history and the future. So some of these examples that you see of rebranding they are flat, but they go back to what they initially looked like. So, for example, the closest to what they looked like in the very beginning is Citroën. So they actually went to the old logo, but stylized it in a modern way. It's 2023 after all. All new cars in the EU will be powered by electric motors, and in Norway as soon as 2025. So this legislation has pushed automotive brands to reimagine their brand image, and most of them did a pretty fantastic job. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive list. Mini, Audi, I think, Rolls-Royce, and others have rebranded too. When I say some of them did a pretty fantastic job, I really mean it. One of my favorites and least legible ones is the Kia logo. One day we were walking downtown and my wife was asking me, what car company has a KN logo? And I was a little bit confused. KN logo. I like cars, so KN logo? I don't know. So we Googled it, right? KN logo, and the logo that comes up is Kia's new logo. Around 30,000 queries per month on Google is KN logo, which is to say that, yeah, it's not legible, but they did a fantastic job. I won't comment it anymore, but it was a pretty hilarious case of rebranding. Some of them just fixed their typography, cleaned it up a little bit, like Aston Martin. Some of them just went flat. Peugeot also went old school. This is their old logo. Have they done a good job? I won't comment on that. But we see this shift in the context of automotive industry because they fall in line, because if they stayed where they were 2, 3, 5 years ago, they wouldn't be deemed as modern and up-to-date and technological like their competitors are. One of the writers that I was consulting during this study suggested that designers and businesses should take into the account typographic research, as it allows design decisions to be based on what he says are rational findings, rather than just like a personal reference. And this body of work that I presented briefly to you aligns with his findings, and it shows that we do subconsciously recognize, we assign, and we absorb typographic personality along with the meaning of the text. And brands can and they need to leverage typography to establish a better connection between the form of their logo type and the personality that they want to evoke. And this can be achieved through a series of typographic tests, like the one that I formatted during this project. And with that, I would like to thank for your attention. I believe that we will now open a Q&A/comment session.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Miroslav, for your presentation. If anyone has any questions or any comments, feel free to open your mics, or if you want, you can write them in the chat. In the meantime, I just want to say thank you once again, Miroslav, for accepting our invitation to being here with us today. It has been really interesting and really captivating presentation.
Thank you. I tried to keep it short and sweet.
Yes. So does anyone have any questions, any comments?
We can also talk about why did you choose a particular brand that you wanted to reimagine, and how would that look like?
Yes, go ahead, Mafalda.
Hi, Miroslav.
Hi there.
Great presentation. Congratulations. I have a question regarding your research, because you said that you conducted the survey to professionals, people that already worked in design.
Exactly.
And when you said that, I thought, well, but I understand the reason why, but I also think that this will, or at least would bias a little the results, because in an overall perspective, we want brands to impact on the consumer and not on the designers. So as a regular user, I would have a different reaction to that survey. So, did you consider that? You decided to go through a different audience because it was your goal for the research, or you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mafala. You are absolutely correct. I listed actually that as one of the flaws of this research, because my goal was to only go into the professional audience, because those are the people who push a certain type of trend, right? And it's usually the external agencies. You rarely find in-house design and brand teams within these companies. You can find them, and they obviously work closely with the agencies doing that. But in the end, it is the either agency or external effort that is pushing the decision to the internal team.
Yes, and they follow.
Yes.
Sorry, and they follow the trends, and they also do some market research. But I don't know. Is the final consumer aware of this work, or is the work impacting the real consumer?
It's a chicken and egg.
Yes, I know.
Egg question, but it's a pretty good question, and I would say that you are closer to the truth than if we were just consulting ourselves and made something that we want to see out there. In the end, it is the consumer that is voting for the brand, obviously with their money. And you usually I have worked on slightly bigger projects where you hire another agency to do big research for your audience, to place them, and based on that make brand decisions. So this is something that needs to be done for sure. My focus was coming from, okay, what did the designers say, rather than that. But yes. I think this is what brands do, and they should be consulting their target group in the end.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question from Sophia.
Yes, I'm going to read it. Sophia says, you commented that some brands went in a more modern direction, but others went in a more traditional one. Why do you think that is, and what might be their goal with it?
I would say the bigger the company is, the bigger the board of directors, which makes the decision is. And this is my completely honest answer to that. I have seen redesign campaigns where you have submissions, right? But then the final decision is brought by the board. And that is that can be good, but more than often it's not good. So
you're right.
To give you my completely subjective impression, Peugeot went old school. They went back to what the original Peugeot logo looked like, but they made some really weird decisions. The logo, I've seen it on the cars around the city. The application for it's not legible enough because you have very thin lines that they have made. So their execution was questionable. But having worked in the corporate sector, I know how many rounds of meetings you have to come to the same page, and more often than not, the one with the most shareholder voting rights is the one who makes the decision in the end. So to answer this question, you really need to go back and see the process and how it looked like in the company. What I like is that when you have an internal design team, in-house design team, they are able to push for good decisions more often than not.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if anyone does have any questions. Mafalda says that she had that experience twice.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi,
go
Sarah.
ahead.
Okay, so I didn't understand at the beginning where you were showing us this like statistics and stuff. Like I didn't understand why a specific like logo type will make us like is it like an emotion that comes? Like, I don't understand why something is good and another one is not. Like, I don't know, like the Netflix one or whatever. Like, is it specific emotions that we feel when we see them? Does it like connect in some other ways? Like, this is what I didn't understand. How is a logo good? Like, what are the standards?
Well, that is the question for for $1 million, isn't it? I mean, it's fairly subjective. If you look culturally speaking, you have countries in the east of the world which perceive white color as the color of sadness and death and so forth. And for us, it's the wedding, it's the joy, it's openness and whatnot. So it is fairly subjective. How is that determined? It's a series of complex historical and cultural factors. What is modern? Can we answer that question? Like how do we perceive that something is 2030 versus 1990? Because if you look at fashion, for example, fashion is cyclical, right? So this type of collar was popular in the 70s and 80s, and it's and in my country where I come from, we have a special name for it and so forth. So to answer your question, I don't have an answer to that question. Like we can make like a specific set of subjective rules, and then based on that vote. That won't get us, the true answer, but it will get us closest to what the majority thinks it's the case.
Because so my background is like Greek Arab, which is very particular, the way the Greek how they write, and you can understand the letters, and the Arabic ones, they're very like, most of the brands that you showed us, more like the car ones, aren't they from Germany? So it kind of feels like it's from the same country but different prototypes. So I don't really understand why would we get which one is better than the other. Like, it's very European, all of them. So then I don't understand what makes it more important, like more good looking than the other one, because it's not like about cultural so much. It's very similar. It's the same to me, at least, maybe.
Four of these that I'm showing on the screen are not European ones. They're Asian. What determines if they're good or not, I would say, is the context in which this particular industry is in. So if the big players like, let's say, Volkswagen, BMW decides that this is 2030, the rest of them will fall in line because they do not want to be perceived as old school.
Yeah.
So immediately when you had 2 or 3 of these major brands change their image and how they vocalized it, they said, we are about tomorrow, we are about electrification, and we care about environment. The rest of them were like, well, so are we. Why should we be worse? So it's not about, whether we look good or modern, it's how it fits the context of this particular industry. One more thing that you mentioned, and that's very interesting, your own cultural background. You said it's a mix of Greek and Arab. But let's look at how the Arabic script is written. It's written from right to left. Correct me if I'm wrong. So being forward thinking and forward moving in that culture would mean going from right to left. But Eurocentric culture is like, that is the way from left to right is being perceived as motion, dynamics, and going forward. Yeah. So it depends. What I'm trying to say is it depends on the context. Because in this particular context, this can be future, this can be 2030, 2040. In some other industry, other style is more fitting, more appropriate. So the appropriateness depends on the context in which we are immersed in.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for asking. I'm not saying these are not true or false questions, but they're difficult to explore because culturally speaking, we are complex.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? Any more comments?
I mean, I can just add on top of that. You can see what big brands are trying to do is they are trying to have a coherent, unified image across all of their deliverables, right? Because that is cheaper to do, and that ties and creates a very strong brand image. But on the other hand, you have brands who are adjusting their commercials for the market in which they present themselves. For that very specific reason that you mentioned, cultural context, it is different. It will be perceived as different. So you cannot show the same ad in Norway, in South Africa, in the United States, and Asia and expect the same results, even though it's the same company. So context is very important.
So what you say is that they are adjusting the communication, but they are keeping the brand. They are working branding globally and then adjusting communication locally.
Exactly.
I think it's a good move. Yes.
You have like one brand element that is always there. It's always hovering. It's keeping the thing together.
Yes. When you were doing the Mentimeter and I was selecting the brands that I would like to change, the first brand that popped up was Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
But then I realized, well, I don't feel the need to change Coca-Cola branding because it's so strong that we don't feel that need. And it's kind of a love brand also. So you don't feel that because they are also doing the other work well. So they are adjusting the communication depending on the country they are advertising. They are adjusting the tone depending on the cultural aspects of each target. So in my case, Coca-Cola is a brand that I will not change for nothing.
But what was your motivation? Like, why did you want to change it? Is it a form or?
For Coca-Cola, I wouldn't do it. But for Pepsi, for instance, I would do it. Because I can understand the values of the brand, but when I see the logo, there's something there that I think it doesn't match, do you know? But it's a very personal, and that's why I was asking, why did you do your research only with designers and not with the final targets? Because I think the final test is what does the brand makes us feel, right?
Exactly.
And with Pepsi, although I love Pepsi and I can understand their work, I cannot relate, or I don't feel Pepsi the way I feel Coca-Cola. I drink more Pepsi than Coca-Cola, but the brand is different. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think it was during Christmas time, because that's when Coca-Cola is most active when it comes to their advertising. I started spending my free time in the evening, and my wife asked me, what are you doing? And I was redesigning Coca-Cola's logo. Because if you are a typographer, and there is one in the audience, is actually my old mentor, so welcome. If you look at it from a purely technical standpoint, it's horrific. It is really bad. But the more I worked on it, the more I understood that I'm taking away too much of what it is. And what it is exactly what you said. It is the perception of the brand that we take as the brand. So it is everything about it that we think and know that makes a certain brand what it is. So redesigning Coca-Cola would first cost enormous amount of money, and no C-level management is going to approve that. And then look what happened to Twitter. You literally had the word to tweet in the dictionary. How many brands can say that their name is in the dictionary? And suddenly you take that away from the audience. You diminish whatever value was existing there. So the reason why we see bad logos, there are some fixes that can be done, but the reason why we see bad logos is simply that they are familiar, we are tied to them emotionally because that's how we perceive them. I mean, look at the advertising for Coca-Cola. It's never, hey, we have this drink with sugar that you should drink, and it's not good for you. It's more like open for happiness. Every year they decide on the new theme. So yes, I'm ranting right now, but it's exciting topic.
I just
But did you
wanted
manage to? Sorry.
about the Coca-Cola that in like the Middle East, more Arab countries, there is a huge consumption of Pepsi. So everybody kind of knows Pepsi, and they even have shirts that they wear blue and red, and they go and they give shirts for free around the streets. So I would say that Coca-Cola is not like, it's considered even maybe a bit more expensive and unnecessary to get Coca-Cola. So Pepsi is what everybody goes for. So I do think it's as well the advertisement and how it goes. So I'm a team Pepsi here, so I just wanted to say it, and that's it.
Team water here.
Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think there's not. I believe we can finish this masterclass here. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and so thank you for your inputs this afternoon. And I hope to see you again soon, perhaps in another masterclass. And Miroslav, once again, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.